right, welcome back to Ground Zero Salem. As always, I'm your host, Pat. So this is a reshoot of the original little intro spiel I had for this video. I just felt like I could have done a little bit better. It was a little rambly, kind of walking around, mulling it around in my brain. I was like, you could talk about this a little bit more extensively. I wanted to take a little bit of a shortcut, a little bit of a detour away from just stuff I've acquired in the past 6 months or so for an update or two and talk about a few other topics. Specifically, I wanted to talk about doom metal on this update because since I left, around the time I left Raleigh, about a month or two before I moved away, I started a deep dive back into doom metal. It's a genre I like a lot. It's kind of a perennial thing with me. Once every couple of years, I go in on it hard. This time it's been coupled with like I mentioned a few updates back, it kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of proto metal stuff from the 70s, some psychedelia, things like that. I've been going a little bit more into the kind of groovy, stonery direction with a lot of my listening and purchases. Bands like Acid King, who I never really got into previously, a lot of the Southern Lord stuff, stuff that doesn't even qualify as metal or doom or anything, like Fu Manchu, for example, Dozer, stuff like that. So I've been kind of going down the rabbit hole in that direction and revisiting a lot of old classics. And just as it were, just a week or so ago, supposedly, and I think it's probably for good this time, Ozzy Osbourne has finally thrown in the towel. He played this huge concert with Black Sabbath and a bunch of friends. I heard about it all day long. It made me kind of think about things in a way, kind of wax nostalgic about just that whole sound, that band from Birmingham, what they influenced, the period in my life in which I discovered them. Doom metal obviously owes its existence to Black Sabbath. And it's interesting because, like most genres, doom metal was I'm sure probably a genre name, a tag thrown on a handful of bands who weren't trying to be anything specific. If you look at the roots of it, you have St. Vitus on the West Coast, Trouble in Chicago, and Pentagram, The Obsessed, and a few of the related Pentagram projects like The Demon and Death Row and stuff like that going on in the early 80s, all kind of disparate from each other, all kind of going against the grain, not doing at all what was cool at the time. Everybody else was speeding up in metal. They were slowing down. So I thought it'd be interesting to kind of look at it from that perspective and think about what has happened since then. Obviously, doom has had a huge boom in popularity, especially in like the late 2010s or so. A lot of really massively popular stuff coming out for the genre. And it's weird because I am just so caught up in other things. I didn't even know about this Black Sabbath final show Ozzy retirement thing at all until the day it was happening. I'm on social media like anybody else. My Facebook feed and my Threads feed and everything else is talking about, oh, David Draymond got booed and they hid Bill Ward behind a giant throne. And I don't know. I'd like to watch snippets from that and see. I guess some of the performances were really, really good. A lot of the guest musicians and other bands that played aren't really my cup of tea. Some definitely are, but it's just kind of funny that I don't have a singular favorite band, but I've been a huge fan of Black Sabbath, even at a time when their visibility seemed to be at a kind of an all-time low. I'm not sure. I was a teenager in high school. I didn't know more than like 4 people that listened to the same music I did. So maybe in other markets they were massive, but they were always a well covered, bands doing their songs and everything. But I feel like bands like Sabbath and Motorhead, when I got into them, were just not really talked about other than by bands that they had influenced. And doom metal was such a cult thing when I was a little guy, when I was 16, 17 years old. It was all kind of the same thing, which was interesting. All these splinter sub genres like funeral doom and epic doom and everything. It was just one thing, more or less, when I got into it. I took an interest in it, and the bands that I got into were Paradise Lost, Saint Vitus, Candlemass, Solitude Aeternus, Disembowelment, and that's about it. Like, I didn't hear Sleep until a few years later and didn't really like them the first time. like a lot of the other stuff, it took me forever to track down. Cathedral being another major one. How can I forget? I just kind of wanted to cover a bunch of what I feel to be essential Doom records, everything going up to like maybe the mid-aughts. Now, like I said, there's been a spike in popularity of this stuff. A lot of the more contemporary Doom bands I'm not super into. I've got a couple Chemist CDs. They haven't really knocked me on my ass or anything like that. I've got some Thou stuff. Trying to think if there's anything more recent. I really like Crypt Sermon. They're more traditionalists though. So mostly what I'm talking about kind of falls in the epic or traditional Doom metal territory, slow heavy metal stuff. There's also the kind of thing where I think it's been talked about on Metallurgy a few times, and I've heard it discussed like, is that even really Doom though? Because it's not slow enough. It's more just traditional heavy metal, right? And that always kind of made me scratch my head. That idea that like certain Trouble records or Pentagram or something like wouldn't be considered Doom necessarily. Maybe you are just going by the really heavy Cathedral sort of influence. But I just wanted to get into all that. So I'm talking about a period right up until the whole occult rock craze started kind of blowing up with Blood Ceremony, Devil's Blood, a little band called Ghost from Sweden, and all that stuff. I feel it was not quite Doom metal, but it was Doom adjacent. Adjacent, everybody's favorite word. And that kind of, I think, like sparked more of an interest in like this kind of 70s inspired hard rock, heavy metal, slower kind of stuff. So going right up until then, I think there's some really good semi-modern classics that are out of the conversation. I don't look at every single list. More and more these days, I don't really follow a lot of videos listing off essential this or essential that, or blog posts or magazine articles, if those still exist. So I don't really know, but it seems like the last time I looked at it, most of the time it's just the heavy hitters that get recommended, Epicus, Doomicus, Metallicus, and Mournful Cries. So a bunch of, I feel like low-rated releases I'm going to discuss from the aughts, and then I think some maybe lesser well-regarded albums by the OGs that I think are awesome and definitely worth checking out. So that's what I'll be getting into. Enjoy the costume change. It's a really great Rollins band shirt I'm wearing. Welcome back to Ground Zero Salem. Let's do it. Everybody, Doom on.
Would you please stop singing?
Proximity warning. Planet ahead.
We're here!
So I just, off the dome, grabbed, I don't know, like 15 albums. I meant it to be like a clean dozen or 13 or something like that, but I pulled a bunch of stuff. So anyways, I want to talk about Doom. Let's talk about Doom. Let's start off with the two CDs I've got on the top here. This is Place of Skulls with Vision. I did not grab a Pentagram album or CD in this pile. You know that band. Their reputation precedes them, whether it's good or bad. But this is Victor Griffin, who is a chief songwriter in Pentagram, 80s into the 90s, and then when they reformed in the 2010s, I think he was on a couple records. I just talked about his solo home recordings compilation, Late for an Early Grave, last update. This is his band from the early 2000s, Place of Skulls. They have a whole bunch of releases, I think like 4 or 5. This one is pretty special in that it has Scott Weinrich on guitar and vocals. Both of the guys share vocal duties. And it's just beautiful, picture perfect dictionary definition of Maryland area doom, DC area doom, if you know all that stuff from there, The Obsessed and Pentagram and Lost Breed and Earthride, Wretched, all that kind of stuff. It's dirgy in moments, but very melodic and beautifully written. And I feel like a lot of those bands from that area definitely have just like a tinge of southern rock, like soul to them. And I think that works out great for this. It sounds directly in between Victor Griffin's work in Pentagram and all the wino stuff. You know, a couple of these songs easily could be passable for Spirit Caravan songs or Obsessed songs. I saw the Obsessed play Church Within front to back right before I moved up here when I was still down in Raleigh, and it was mind-blowing. Wonderful, wonderful performance of that entire album. Then we got, I mean, this is a no-brainer, right? Solitude Aeternus, Into the Depths of Sorrow. This, you know, is a pioneer for that whole kind of epic doom thing. You know, slow, powerful, heavy riffs, but there's something very, at least on this, very like thrash in tone. I feel like the production is like a little bit on the compressed side, and the guitar tone sounds more like some kind of Bay Area kind of guitar tone, but it's very heavy. This was a Texas band. I like all their records. I don't think they have a bad record in the pile. This, their debut, I feel like they nailed it. Might be bias, you know, nostalgia bias, because this was the first thing I heard by them. But Rob Lowe's vocals, I mean, he went on to guest sing in Candlemass for a bit there, are just piercing and mournful and awesome. And I feel really bad for Richard Marx under here, being sad under this commuter rail bridge or whatever. Great. This came out in early 90s, 91 or 92. Originally came out on Roadrunner. This is a Texas label called Brain Ticket reissued this, but all their stuff is great. You can't go wrong. I think there's a twofer with this and Beyond the Crimson Horizon, I want to say, on the same, like a 2 CD digipack that's really nice. All right, Warhorse, Heaven Turns to Ash, came out on Southern Lord sometime in the early 2000s, I want to say. Localish fellas to hear. They're from Worcester. This is incredibly heavy. Southern Lord, kind of the beginning of like what was to be considered that Southern Lord sound for a while, before they got into like reissuing a lot of hardcore punk and everything. They still do the heavy stuff too, of course. This is just massively mastodon heavy, not the band, the actual beast. If you like Sleep, I'd say probably Holy Mountain was a pretty big influence on this, tone-wise. I'd say elements of it really remind me of the classic Forest of Equilibrium by Cathedral. It is just punishingly heavy. I wouldn't say death metal vocals, but definitely not. We're not talking about like Sage in the Wilderness, Ozzy kind of vocals. We're talking about pretty gruff vocals on this. A bunch of members of this band played in a death metal band before this in the 90s called Desolate, who were pretty awesome if you like older death metal stuff, if you like kind of northeastern death metal, very, very heavy stuff. But they went on to do Doom, and I want to say several Doom projects came out of this that are still gigging. Conclave, Jerry's band, the bassist, excellent band. And I want to say Benthic Realm were at least at one point Warhorse related. But yeah, I discovered this because I went on doommetal.com, which I think might still be around. I went on the message board looking for anything that resembled Forest of Equilibrium by Cathedral, which may be my favorite doom metal record, because there's nothing really that sounds like that. It was the beginning of Lee Dorian and guys from Acid Rain trying to make the heaviest possible thing ever, it sounded like. You know, it's got sort of 90s production in that record, but it's so crushingly heavy. It brought like a Swan's heaviness to doom metal. And it's to this day, there's not too many things that really sound like that particular record, even other Cathedral records. But somebody said, yeah, Warhorse, When Heaven Turns to Ash, is about as close as you're going to get. And I can see certain similarities, especially when the passages get particularly dirgy. Then Count Raven, High on Infinity. This is the third LP by this Swedish band. Came out early 90s, I want to say, maybe mid 90s. This was another band that had like a long hiatus and has come back and put out a few records that are astounding, like just as good, if not better, than their early material, a la like Satan, the band. But great, slow paced, again, dirgy, misery soaked, but with a little bit of a groove. We're not talking like boogie rock riffs or anything like that, but there's a little bit of a Sabbathy groove to it. And speaking of that, the vocalist Christian Linderrson, I want to say his name is, yes, Christian Linderrson. His vocals on this, he sounds like a dead ringer for Ozzy, which is just insane. I mean, that's a really, really hard thing to pull off. It's one of the most unique vocalists ever. Then we've got Hour of 13. This is the self-titled one. Easily could have grabbed The Ritualist, the second LP, which is also excellent. They have a few more after that, which are very good. Starting with just the ominous bass riff to Call to Satan. This is just nonstop. It doesn't get too slow. It has sort of a driving pace. I feel like it sits comfortably with the bands that came out of the new wave of British heavy metal that were sort of doomy, but sometimes certain people might have trouble calling them straight up doom metal, like Pagan Altar or Witchfinder General. I consider them doom bands, but what's in a label, But this is kind of a more modern take on that. This is from, again, I want to say the mid 2000s or so. Phil Swanson's vocals are also awesome. Terrifying wizard, in the wasteland kind of vocals. Clarion call to summon demons, that kind of thing. He went on to sing for Sumerlands, who are also completely great. And he had a side band that I just picked up an LP by called Britain Rights, which was almost like Hammer horror themed doom metal, like vampiric doom metal. Very, very cool. This is great. Pick it up. You want to get into some good doom. The second album's really good too. All their stuff, you really can't go wrong. All right, I mentioned Pagan Altar. This is a great album. The packaging itself, kind of a pain in the ass, if I'm being honest. Very nicely done. This was put out by Buried Between Time and Dust. And it's got this cool, like almost sort of embossed, like leathery texture. This really, really thick cardstock. I'm one of those people, I'm like, I don't care about ring wear. I like to keep my albums in my jacket of my records, and they don't fit in there. And it just kind of drives me crazy. Whatever. If you didn't know, Pagan Altar were a new wave of British heavy metal band during that era of classic British heavy metal that were around for a cup of coffee and called it quits. I think they did like 1 or 2 recordings. I don't even know if those recordings got officially released or not. I don't remember, but they had a ton of material and came back and recorded an album's worth of the stuff in what was present day at the time, which was, again, the mid 2000s. And this is just awesome. What's particularly cool about it is it has numerous tracks with angelic, like female backing vocals, kind of operatic, kind of the way Paradise Lost used them, in sort of a similar manner. But I can hear elements of like British folk in this, a lot of kind of classic rock stuff that's very well paced and dramatic. I love Terry Jones' vocals. Are a little bit on the nasally side, but they're very charming. I think they work for the music very, very well. A little bit like kind of eccentric. I felt like his stage presence was. I got to see them once at one of the Maryland Death Fests. I think it was 2013. They were awesome. Sadly, no longer with us. R.I.P. Terry Jones. I believe Brendan Radigan, who was the guy who sang for Magic Circle and a bunch of hardcore bands and played drums in Mind Eraser, actually took his place on a tour or 2, which is pretty cool. So yeah, I mean, that's a classic right there. I think it's doom as hell. Just awesome building and crescendoing with all the song structures and the riffs and everything. Now, this is my go-to Candlemass record, which I don't know. I don't hear people prop this up that much. I know that I think there's a music video for Mirror Mirror kicking around out there. I mean, I understand how it kind of took a backseat to Bewitched because that's the really funny one, but that's a cool music video too. This is Ancient Dreams by Candlemass. Again, it might just be nostalgia bias. This was the first one I got. I picked it up. I was visiting family in Cincinnati, Ohio, sometime in the 90s. And I picked this up in, I think, Dead Kennedy's plastic surgery disasters at the same mall. So that's some variation for you. But I don't know, this this record just pounds. It keeps a steady pace throughout. That opening riff to Mirror Mirror, I don't know. Whenever I want to listen to Candlemass, this is the one I listen to. I feel like the riffs are super effective. I love Messiah Markolin's vocals on it. It's super dreamy. This is a bonus. This has a bunch of bonus tracks on it. It's on Svart. So it's got live tracks, which, you know, I don't really need those, but whatever. There's a Black Sabbath medley on here as well that wasn't on the original. I had the tape back in the day on, I think it was Metal Blade this came out on, but yeah. I don't know. It's got a lot of earworms on it. That's, I think, an important part of what I like about it. It's super catchy. Since I'm holding the records, the vinyls, to show off, I think these are like purple and gold. That's pretty cool. That's nice. Svart always does a really good job with everything, packaging and whatnot. Then, you know, again, I love all the Metal Blade Trouble stuff. I, you know, think it's excellent pioneering, you know, heavy metal, doom metal stuff. But really, for my money, my favorite one is the one that came out on Def Jam, the second self-titled, not that that isn't convoluted and confusing. It's produced by Rick Rubin, and he's just got his magic touch of minimalism and getting to the heart of what rocks about a thing. You know, all the Danzig records, the Cult Electric, that sort of thing. He's putting that kind of touch on this. It's very like go for the throat. There's elements of it that are like pretty upbeat, you know, again, where people who want to split hairs and nerd out might want to say it's not really doom or something. I haven't heard that, but I'm sure there's people like that out there. My particular favorite song on here is The Wolf. Psychotic Reactions, great song. On this, they're actually starting to, I think, show off a little bit more of like 70s or even 60s influence here and there. You're starting to get a little bit more like tiny bit of the Beatles and Cream and everything, which you'd hear more and more as the years went on, especially with the album after this, Manic Frustration, which is also really, really good. Eric Wagner sounds awesome on it. I feel like he's channeling Robert Plant just as much, if not more, than Ozzy on it. I get that from it, you know. It's got that sort of slightly bluesy kind of thing going on. Then, jumping into the future to 2006, TP Records, who put out a lot of great kind of sludge stuff and crust, like a lot of crust that went kind of sludgy or doomy, like crap, what's the name of that band? Oh, they had like Logical Nonsense and bands like that on there, a bunch of others, Grimple, stuff like that. This is Jay Mascis from Dinosaur Jr.'s kind of Sabbath worship. I get kind of Sabbath. It kind of sounds like Witchcraft from Sweden a little bit. Definitely Pentagram. You know, it's got really, really foreboding, like repeating riffs on it that I like a lot. It's very like almost kind of entrancing and hypnotic. The kind of the passages the songwriting goes down on this, and it's there he is. There's Jay Mascis on the back there. I don't know if people talk about this a lot. Like the second album is a little bit more of its own thing. It's aping other bands a little bit less, maybe. It's kind of almost garagey. It still has like sort of almost a Sabbathy thing with it in parts, but this is wonderful, just like straight up kind of stonery doom metal. 2006 TP Records, Witch, self-titled. Then I didn't pull out Forest because I've talked about Forest of Equilibrium on this channel at least 4 or 5 times probably. One of my favorite doom metal records of all time, possibly my favorite. I already said that. This is the EP that came after, Soul Sacrifice. This is the first thing that I got by Cathedral. And if I can find it, I already did a Google image search, couldn't find it at all. There was a really funny, pretty big ad. I think it was a half-page ad that had different musicians talking about what they thought about Cathedral and how good and heavy they were. And there's a Phil Anselmo quote where he says, "Heavier than the cornerstone of Westminster Abbey." Like, all right, brother. But yeah, like I said, you know, on that first record, I feel like they brought that exclusively British, like we really like the Swans, you know, how Head of David and Godflesh and Napalm Death kind of borrowed that crushing heaviness. I feel like they brought that into a doom metal context. And this, they have that in parts. This is only 4 songs. It's an EP. It's a long EP because it's Cathedral. It's, I think, like 25 minutes or something. Like Frozen Rapture is pretty dirgy, pretty slow. But Golden Blood Flooding is kind of the last song on here, is very much like a warning of what's to come later on with the Ethereal Mirror and albums past that. They got way more like psychedelic and rocking. This isn't at all, but they definitely got goofy a lot, which was a massive disappointment to me. Talking about dancing the Martian bossa nova and all this stuff on their second full length. Ethereal Mirror, which I now love, by the way. I've totally come around on that record. It's great. But this is almost sort of the intermediary, you know, the rubber soul, if you will, of Cathedral. And it's only 4 songs. They reworked Soul Sacrifice, which is a track from Forest of Equilibrium, made it a little bit longer and more fleshed out. But yeah, I mean, hook-laden, catchy, occasionally rocking, but also very, very dirgy and frozen in spots. One of my favorite EPs of all time. And you can get both. I think now if you pick up Forest, they've got the first 2 on the same CD, and there's definitely versions of that floating out there. Then, you know, I'd be remiss to not talk about St. Vitus. Of course, California, Doom Merchants, you know, really helped kind of spearhead the whole thing, the whole sound. Their earlier records on SST, which was, of course, Greg Ginn from Black Flag's label, were very stripped down sounding. They were all engineered or produced by Spot, who produced most of the SST stuff. Very bare bones, you know, not a lot of layering. I like that about it. It was certainly an acquired taste. The first one I ever picked up was Children of Doom, COD, which is the one with Christian Linderrson from Count Raven singing on it, which was a great introduction to St. Vitus because that album was produced by Don Dokken. How's that for a switch? Going from the Black Flag producer to Don Dokken in like 10 years or whatever. That one's very cleanly produced, very easy to listen to. Christian Linderrson is doing kind of a wino impression as opposed to an Ozzy impression on it. And he sounds great. No shade. It's really good. And then I backtracked and got the Heavier Than Thou compilation, which is great. To this day, it's the way I prefer to listen to those songs. I tracked down all the individual records. St. Vitus is one of my favorite bands. I love Mournful Cries, Hollow's Victim. Everything they did in the 80s is perfect to me. I love all of it, but really, there's something about that sequence and that track listing that's on Heavier Than Thou that is just perfect to me. All that being said, V is a different beast entirely. This originally came out on Hellhound Records from Germany, who put out a lot of good underground doom stuff. A lot of the Maryland stuff, as well as Count Raven. For a German label, like almost all their artists, it seems like were from the USA, and most of them were from Maryland, DC area. Count Raven was an outlier. Blood Farmers from Brooklyn were another one. At any rate, originally came out on that. It's been reissued on a bunch of different labels since then. There was a reissue on Roadrunner. There was a reissue on Relapse, or there was a reissue on Southern Lord. I think this is on Hankenstein, which I'm not familiar with, but I think somebody from St. Vitus might be involved with the label, perhaps. This is good because it's kind of branching off a little bit from what they were doing previously with Wino. There's a little bit more songcraft. There's a little bit more like hookiness to it. Wino is kind of having more of an influence on the music, it seems like, playing guitar on a few songs. You have songs like When Emotion Dies, which is like this acoustic ballad that's just really, really sad. It's got layered male and female vocals. Ice Monkey, Angry Man, I Bleed Black, which is, I saw St. Vitus like 3 or 4 times when they started gigging again, and I Bleed Black was always like a big part of their set. I think they opened with it numerous times. I don't know, the production's a little bit more filled out. It's a little bit more massive sounding, layered guitars. I love the minimalist nature of all their SST stuff and how it's like a very punk in its own way, but this is a little bit more accessible, I'd say, as far as St. Vitus records go. So I'd recommend that if you're just kind of starting to explore this stuff. Either that or Children of Doom. All right, then we've got Revy Biz. Nobody Beats the Biz. Reverend Bizarre. Crush the Insects. Doom What Thou Wilt. This was reissued on Svart. I don't know what it originally came out on. It might have originally come out on Svart too. I'm not sure. But again, we're talking aughts here, aughts Doom, green vinyl. It's very nice. And I feel like there's a little bit of there's a little bit of tongue-in-cheekness going on with this. The first song is called Doom Over the World. And it's almost like a doom metal anthem. Like, yeah, we're dooming it all over the place. There's a song about Cromwell, the the king. There's something just that feels just like not 100% self-serious about it, and I appreciate that about it. It's very Finnish in its own way. It's got a lot of moments that certainly harken to all the masters, Saint Vitus and Trouble and everything like that. Maintaining its own kind of for its time modern approach. Production-wise, the heaviness, the sort of more throbbing, huge orange amplifier kind of thing was kind of getting more in vogue. You could hear that with Warhorse as well. It's certainly coming into play with this. This is a killer LP. I don't think they have any bad stuff, Reverend Bizarre. That's probably my favorite. And then it's sort of the outlier on this, but I just grabbed it because I was like, man, I love this record. Acid Witch Stoned, put out by Hell's Headbangers. Again, I think late 2000s. But this was just such a cool thing, a cool package to get. And talk about, tongue-in-cheek. Like, there's a lot going on in that picture. I noticed there's a Bratz album back there, the pre-Merciful Fate band, which is pretty awesome. The Gate, the movie there, Blood Sausage, But yeah, it's just a Slasher Dave and Shagrat. It's a two-person project. I know Slasher Dave has been involved in a bunch of other stuff that I'm not really that familiar with, but this mixes all those like really stony riffs, kind of Sabbathy stonery riffs, and a lot of like weird, like spooky keyboards, and it's got death metal vocals, but it all feels really cohesive and catchy, well written, super fun. This is a great record for around these parts. Witch City, Halloweenville, even comes with these like one of these Halloween decorations type of thing. This like witch with a bong, Yeah, I mean, there are other records. I think I have Evil Sound Screamers as well. That's pretty good. That's a good record, but nothing really has nailed it for me like Stoned has. This is awesome. So yeah, that's my pile of doom metal records. I might do another one of these because I mean, there's some obvious choices that I haven't really talked about. And there's also some more contemporary ones that I feel like deserve some love that have come out past the year 2000. I think Arid Ruin from Rochester's great. Benthic Realm from Worcester's really, really good, as well as Conclave. I feel Kruthu from the Midwest, they're awesome. I feel like there's a lot more you can talk about. And I'm not sure. I'm out of the loop in terms of like watching other people talk about records. Once again, getting caught up watching like Turkey Tom and Papa Gut content, Papa Meat. So I don't know. I don't know if people have really gone in depth talking about like essential doom records, but this is certainly a worthwhile pile that I think if you tracked all this stuff down, if you were just checking out Sabbath and you wanted more, and there's a lot of different directions one can go in exploring this stuff. I always stayed away from a lot more of like the really stonery stuff for a while, including when you veer out of the doom or metal and go into stoner rock. And one of the things that I've been exploring the past couple of months is getting into like Fu Manchu, who are like completely necessary for that type of stuff, and Caius, and still doom, but kind of leaning more towards kind of stonery stuff. Also is like Acid King. That was a band that I put off getting into for a long time. So I would like to cover all of that on my musical journey here with you at Ground Zero Salem, and I will. But for right now, it's my day off. I'm going to file these and probably go to the video game store and then a record shop and try to stump Aaron the Metal Theologian and ask him about weird prog records that I've never heard of. So until next time, I'll see you later. Probably next update, I'll be back in on just the random purchases from my hiatus from YouTube thing. I hope all of you have a good day. Bye.